Chapter 7, The Distortion Diaries, July 17th, 2034. It is difficult for me to admit that Cleve was not in fact the thug for which I had originally taken him. His offer, although on the surface simple, was truly a complex contract of subtleties. Cleve was going to give me the ghost light, to do with as I pleased, under the stipulation that he or any of his clients would not be subject to any alteration or dispersal not of their own agreement. I was to treat Cleve's associates as if they were any other patients which might enter my clinic. It was insinuated that I may well wish to place an even greater amount of concern for the well-being of these people, as many of them had dangerous connections of their own in various parts of the world. It was only as Cleve explained these details that I began to see the true scope of what he had in mind. At one point he paused and waited for my response. When I did not speak, he asked, "So, Doc, what do you think?" I'm trying to understand exactly how this could benefit me other than the acquisition of the device. I think you should see this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You have the chance to do things that otherwise would never have been made available. These people will pay, but you and I both know that none of this is really about money. This is about expression. This is about art. This is about finding a place where nightmare meets flesh, flesh meets God, and then living in that place, Doc. What if I told you that I've seen that place, Cleve, and you don't want to go there? I would say that you should let me find out for myself. During the following months of working with Cleve, I finally began to see the full vision of his plan. Every few weeks I received a phone call informing me that he had another client who was ready to undergo some particular procedure. Cleve displayed each surgery as a live webcast, which was shown on underground websites and through file sharing all around the world. Cleve had collected a massive and awe-inspiring group of admirers who watched as I, disguised in surgical mask and clothing, performed all manner of thrilling procedures on enthusiastic and willing participants. These strange and twisted personalities screamed with ecstasy under the influence of the drug administered by Cleve. I would learn that many were already addicts, and that its influence most likely had escalated their bizarre fascinations to the point at which they had found themselves now. They would arrive at the warehouse turned surgical lab which Cleve had rented for the singular purpose of displaying his webcasts in a dark and foreboding environment. Each patient had detailed diagrams and imaging designs which they downloaded onto our lab computer, indicating the modifications and alterations they wished implanted. The sheer variety and creativity of their designated alterations was truly a sight to behold. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was beginning to feel admiration for another human being. These people were artists, using their own bodies as a canvas on which to generate their nightmares, a feat even I could never hope or dare to accomplish. In the meantime, my own craft was growing in ways that I never could have dreamed without the use of the indispensable ghost light. No longer did I fear the betraying spirit of my victim fleeing to some police-employed medium. However, the ghost light had become something of a fascination to me in itself. I have stood over the twisted grotesquerie of my own private creation and watched with wonder and awe as the spirit form of my victim assimilates in the room. By delaying the moment of death up until the last few moments of the procedure, I ensure that the apparition will exhibit all the subtleties of the transformation I have wrought on its deceased body. Unfortunately, often the spirit immediately becomes aggressive or attempts to flee from my secret home studio. It is only as I switch on the ghost light that the spirit is frozen, as if mesmerized by the glow radiating from the half-sphere lens of the device. I have watched with fascination, time and time again, as the specter begins approaching the light and then disseminates into the glow. The thought of where the apparitions go has become an obsession for me. Cleve has told me that Yamashita has planned on marketing the contraption as a ghost illuminator, but no details as to the specifics of its workings are forthcoming. I am sure that the company will convince the public that ghost light actually helps the spirits to move on to some other plane or level of existence. As for myself, I have my doubts. I tried to imagine some means by which a human spirit could be technologically dissipated. However, it seems much more likely to me that these souls are instead either being trapped within some type of containment or else transported elsewhere. As of yet, I have no other means of investigating the mysteries of my favorite new toy, and must satisfy myself with enjoying its attributes in ignorance. I cannot help but wonder how many finally giving the people the choice of ridding themselves of the presence of the departed will change our world. The world's religions will be in an uproar. So long have they professed the sacred and glorious nature of the dead. So many faiths teaching to revere and respect these annoying wraiths. How will they react when the public in mass begins the systematic removal of their beloved deceased entities? Oh, I am sure that there will be those who refuse the gift offered to them by Yamashita's development team. However, with the popular viewpoint being that the ghosts are not actually souls at all, but merely manifestations of particle configurations sustained in electromagnetic fields, I am sure the majority will be buying ghost light in droves. I revel in the ghost light. I find the strange, hued lighting unsettling yet strangely exhilarating all at once. The radiance seems to have a neurological side effect on the living which is hard to describe. I would almost describe the feeling as a high, but one that is akin to no narcotic I have ever experienced. There is a profound otherness to the light. When I stand basking in the illumination, it is as if I am dreaming while still awake. I have found myself quite unintentionally lingering in the light for hours after its purpose has been served. Last night I had been immersed for 3 hours and had become completely amnesiac of the entire period following the dispersal of the ghost. As I moved to shut down the device, I became overwhelmed by the distinct impression that someone was there with me. So strong was this sensation that I hesitated to power down the ghost light and spent another few minutes scrutinizing the room for some intruder. Had some wandering spirit drawn by the indigo luminance found its way into my workshop? Convincing myself that I had been paranoid, I shut the box off and immediately the feelings subsided. Promising myself a hiatus from my private work, I stored the priceless device in its hiding spot and retired for the evening. I fell into a deep and tranquil slumber which was filled with dreams that all took place within a world lit by a bluish purple light. The next evening I met Janique for one of our weekly dates. As a single professional of advancing middle age, I am expected to maintain some sort of long-standing relationship. In these times, it does not matter if I ever bother to marry, but If I were not involved with someone on an intimate level, then eyebrows would be raised. I have no real interest in traditional sexual activity with anyone, but Jonique is attractive and willing to forego regular societal taboos to the point of at least keeping our activities interesting. With the correct amount of alcohol, drugs, and immoral experimentation, I can indulge her in the fantasy that I have more than a passing interest in her. She is a stunningly intelligent woman with absolutely no sense of ethical propriety whatsoever. She comes from a very wealthy family, and I am more or less a trophy for her to parade in front of her clique of envious followers. I wonder how she would feel if she knew that I longed to take that fine, impressive body of hers and turn it inside out. I have stared at her magnificent breasts and imagined splaying them on delicate silver hooks and golden wire. In truth, I despise her, and in all likelihood, she despises me as well. Someday, I have vowed that Jonique will disappear. I will, of course, to all appearances be shattered with concern for her loss, but my lady love will never be found. Yes, someday I will have her to admire, just as I have longed to for these past 3 years. She will be a lovely work hanging with the others in my secret, hidden gallery. Chapter 8. The Journal of Clayton Marcells, October 26th, 2049. As I drove along the long winding road through the Mississippi backcountry, I could not believe what I saw. The early morning sky was dark and cloudy, but ahead a soft glow radiated off of the clouds from an unseen source somewhere below. As I crested the hill, I realized that miles of woods had been cleared for what looked like an enormous prison built across the leveed valley. A mesh wire fence standing at least 15 feet tall surrounded the gray concrete buildings within and stretched out for what seemed like eternity. They had built the grim approximation of a city within, and the pale, sickly glow of the streetlights and security towers was what the overcast sky was reflecting back down onto the fog-laden lowland. I wondered what kind of project could require this kind of security. The sheer number of people that must have been required to operate such a project must have been astronomical. The sun was rising behind the moss-laden branches of the trees as the darkness lighting into the gray of cold morning slowed the rental car, solar-powered Quatsu, as I cleared the security booth where 2 guards armed with pistols holstered at their belts of their uniforms were studying me with intense, cold scrutiny. I knew that the Roses plan should in theory work, and I even had the plastic security badge with the level C clearance to prove it, but something about going inside this fortress with no discernible way out was setting off the panic switch in my brain. I steadied my hands and locked away my fear behind a wall of determination. My goal was set, and there was no way I was backing out now. The guard immediately had me step from the car and stand at the retinal scanner module, which was just inside the bulletproof windows of their shack. They placed my card within a data analyzer, and quickly I saw a jumble of coded information begin to file across the monitor of their computer. After glancing at the data, the guard watched as a green-lettered "cleared" flashed at the bottom of the readout. The guard, a young Asian in his mid-20s, smiled reassuringly and said, "You're good to go," as he handed me the card back. "You'll want to keep that badge visible at all times, Mr. Marcells. Just stick to the main strip until you get to the administration office for quadrant A3 and you'll be fine. Just don't wander or we'll be forced to intercept you. I nodded and thanked him as I eyed the 3 split-screen security monitors, each small square a camera and some 20 squares per screen. I would be completely visible at every point of my visit. I began to wonder exactly how this was going to play out. The gates slowly began to open as I started the soundless electric engine of my car and drove with the feeling of crossing over into a labor camp from the Socialist War of 1949. It had been a pivotal point in human history when the European labor unions had united to overthrow the caste systems of several predominant countries and instituted grotesque eugenics experiments. It had only been after 15 years of bloodshed involving Europe, Asia, America, and the Soviet Republic that the first free enterprise treaties had been introduced. It had only been in the aftermath that it was revealed that several of the socialist unions had embarked on a systematic genocidal extermination of those found to be genetically inferior by the Socialized Medicine Reformation Association. It was whispered that almost all world governments had contracts on the table with SMRA, but the program had been banned after its true colors were shown. As I drove down the street, I was haunted by the eerie likeness that Yamashita's, or correctly, Albright Incorporated's complex bore to the camps instituted by the defunct eugenics program. I spotted the administration office and pulled over before getting out and surveying the surrounding buildings. I realized that even now in the earliest hours of the morning that workers were already busy in the hundreds of programming units within the buildings. There were satellite towers rising from every quadrant and wireless generator pods located at every corner of the community segments. This was a city of employees, all working towards whatever achievement Yamashita had set as its prize. I suspected that few, if any, of the actual grunt programmers had any concept of what the ultimate result of their labor might be. This was the opposite of what I'd seen in Savannah. This was humanity ensnared in its own ambitions to the point of autonomy. I approached the doors of the office and once more had my eyes flashed and swiped my card before the clear 6-inch synth glass door slid open. I entered the lobby and approached a desk where 2 women and 3 men sat before monitors with black wire headsets, typing away at a flat surface keypad. I stood resolutely before the center attendant and waited several moments before the young Indian acknowledged my presence. "Oh, hi, Mr. Marcel's here to see Miss Houston," I said politely. "Of course. Your appointment is at 6, so you have a 3-minute wait until your interview," he said quickly before returning to his work. I nodded and walked over to the waiting area where I poured myself a plastic cup of coffee from the machine and sipped it as I watched a TV screen on the wall which displayed Yamashita Company propaganda on its own broadcasting network. It seemed an endless commercial for its own existence, displaying scenes of smiling workers at distribution centers and off-hour company charity works. There was a worldwide weather report complete with information on how climatic patterns would affect shipping routes and outlet store production. I could not help but wonder what the actual employees thought of this constant stream of not-so-subtle corporate brainwashing. "Mr. Marcells, Mrs. Houston will see you now," I heard over my shoulder and turned to see the man gesturing down the hallway to my right. I walked across the ornate carpets covering the sterile white floor to the open office door at the end. I entered a Spartan office with only a desk and a single chair for furnishings and was met by the large green eyes of a woman of indeterminate age with shoulder-length black hair pinned back over her scalp. She was very beautiful, but the grim cast of her demeanor and restrained nervousness immediately reminded me that we were both dancing on quicksand at the moment. "Mr. Marcells, a pleasure to meet you. Please have a seat." I sat down across from her, and before I could even utter a greeting, she had moved to my side. "I've heard so much about these implants, but I've never met anyone who had one. May I see it?" she said with a false, mechanical tone as she looked intensely into my eyes, commanding me with her expression. Of course. Have a look," I said as I removed my hat and leaned my head sideways. Fascinating, she says as she reached out, as if to casually touch the scar behind my ear. In her hand was a small transmitter which immediately passed the security code of the facility's wireless system directly to me via my implant. As I began to slide into cyberspace, I watched as she continued to talk, as if having a normal conversation, and I forced myself to nod and smile in response as I simultaneously mentally projected into the company mainframe. Since I was actually entering through the company's own network, I was not automatically blocked by a massive security firewall or defensive software. I was like a fly crawling in through a hole in the screen window of a very large house. As long as I didn't make myself obvious, I could land anywhere and take whatever data I might require, as long as I didn't get too greedy and try to overdo it. And as for passwords and security codes, a cyber mage sees the hacked network around him as a projected physical hologram that has been constructed with its own cerebral cortex and interacting with the mage's own neurons. This makes it as easy for the mage to manipulate and access portions of a network as easily as if he or she were cooking a meal in their own kitchen unit. Another bonus of the implant is that a YNIR is not required to transfer data from one hard drive to another via files. Once the implant is in place, the cyber mage's own brain is equipped with a massive memory chip that is directly linked with the mage's own neural system. A recipient is, in essence, his own mainframe, and the acquisition of data can occur in a flash. I do not need to actually review the data that I am acquiring. I simply file it into my memory and review it when appropriate and convenient. What I found upon entering the Yamashita cyberspace was a vast universe of data like I have never seen before. But I knew what I was hunting for. Anything linked to the Ghostlight project that was buried in encryptions and coding. Then I found it. I would begin dissecting the file like a cadaver during an autopsy until I found whatever hidden piece seemed most carefully guarded. I watched as my glowing virtual hands began pulling through the matrix opening and closing files as I began to burrow further and further into the oblivion of numbers and image. I had to concentrate and remember that time was limited. Once you were in, all sense of time was lost in the virtual world. And then I saw it. In all the years that I've been diving through networks like a bird snatching worms from the soil, I have never come across a cluster of data like what I saw that day. If anything that had happened over the past month made me question my grasp on reality, it was the batch of encoded data which stretched before me. And that is saying a lot. There was a feeling emanating from the files like a radiation, or more exactly, like a taint of energy. Coming across it was like being lost in the woods and then stumbling upon a cemetery. It was as if there was energy to the data itself and sent off an instinctual alarm in the core of being. This was bad, polluted, corrupt information. And it was precisely what I was looking for. In the outside world of my physical body, I could hear Miss Houston saying in fake, casual tones, "Our interview time is almost up, Mr. Marcells." And I had no choice but to copy the file directly into my memory without any pretense of what it was. The feeling I had was like I had just ate a large meal in which the meat had gone bad. With no time for reflection, I forced myself to the surface. "It really is an amazing piece of technology, Mr. Marcells," she said, as she glanced to the wall where I sensed she was indicating a hidden camera pod. "I'm sorry I couldn't be of more help in your investigation." Yeah, that's all right, I stammered as I tried to orientate myself to my physical surroundings. "You've been very helpful, and I know you're busy, so I'll just let myself out." She smiled, her face a mask of courtesy as I stood and left the office, with my head throbbing once more. I walked down the lobby, measuring my each step so as not to stumble as the floor moved beneath me, as if I walked on the deck of a ship. I stopped at the desk only long enough to log in my departure with the attendants and then left the building. Seated in the car, I took several long, deep breaths and gazed at my pale, deathly visage in the rearview mirror and hoped my appearance had gone unnoticed. After checking out at the guard shack, I was on my way back to Savannah, reeling with wonder at exactly what was stored in the recesses of my consciousness. My head was pounding, and the nausea became too intense for me to continue driving. I knew I had no other alternative but to seek rest. I found a roadside hotel and rented a room which was no more than a cot and bathroom. I went through my travel bag and withdrew a bottle of painkillers that Ryan had given me. I took two and washed them down with a handful of water from the sink before falling to the bed and losing myself in the agony of the migraine. After what seemed like hours, I drifted off into slumber. But here, in the darkness of sleep, the embedded data began a storm of impulses in my cerebrum. I began to dream. The vision began with the image of a storm that raged infinite and black as it drew me into it with an overpowering pull. The vacuum soon had enfolded me within an electrical torrent, and I felt as if every cell in my body was buzzing with bizarre and unnatural energy. I began to glimpse pockets of solid matter which floated in the maelstrom like islands which I saw through amorphous holes in the fabric of space. Through one, I saw a scene from some ruined world where the outlines of strange creatures with glowing green eyes were stalking in the cloak of darkness. In another, I saw a forest where the trees writhed and fought like the bodies of shining sea creatures, and enormous insects flew in clouds in a black, starless sky. Then, at the very center of it all, rising like a gray specter of stone, was an ancient house whose windows glowed with sickening emerald light. I heard a voice speaking in my ear, and I turned to see standing beside me, unaffected by the powerful wind which felt as if it might tear me to shreds, was Neil Kenny. This was not the Neil Kenny from St. Louis who had died months ago, but another Neil Kenny, whose eyes were cold, dead, and hungry. He was covered in blood and stroked the blade of a long, gleaming dagger in a disturbingly erotic fashion as he spoke. "Come on, Mr. Marcells. Come and find me if you want. I'll wait for you. I'm a very patient man. My room used to be so quiet and white, but now I have an indigo light to see by." I began screaming at him and reaching with my hands, which turned to claws. If only I could grab him, I could tear him to pieces, but he remained out of reach, and soon I was carried away by the wind, and I awakened. Chapter 9. The Journal of Clayton Marcells, October 27th, 2049. "He's got the data, but there's no possible way for me to get it out," Jesse Rose said as he stared at the monitor. They had placed a black headband covered in various electrode sensors around my head, and the main monitor was covered in a series of schematics and what resembled MRI images. "How is that possible?" Ryan asked, the lenses of his goggles rotating furiously as if trying to focus on something in the distance. "One, If he tries to open the file on his own, it will fry his neurons like an overloaded fuse. 2, if I extract it into our system, it will flag us to Yamashita and then devour our hard drive in seconds. This data is like a virus unto itself. He's got a bomb in his head, and we can't even go near it without setting it off. Ugh, I should have known, I groaned as I detached the input cable and bent forward with my face buried in my hands. I knew there was something really messed up with that data when I saw it. It's not your fault, Mr. Marcells, Jesse said, running his hand over a shaved scalp. I've never seen anything like this. I don't even know how they could have constructed a program like this. One of the perks of trading technology with a psychotic world power in a parallel dimension, I suppose, I said, laughing despite my grim prospects. The thing is, I think I'm getting glimpses of the information in a sort of coded dream fog, but I can't make heads nor tails of it. So, where do we go from here? Chris was standing beside Teddy and Esther, holding a house cat as the three stared at me with their obnoxious goggles. Ryan had told me that although Chris had been born Gary Marsh and was a tran operator in this world, he had been a Dutch Catholic priest in his past life named Christophorus. Neil Kenny plays into this, guys, and that's the only lead we have right now. I'm going to St. Louis to see what I can find out. I stood and looked at them all, wondering if maybe they weren't really just hallucinations produced by my frail and crumbling sanity. We're going to wait for contact from our friends on the other side, Ryan said as he pulled at his beard thoughtfully. We'll tell them what we know and see if maybe they can dig something up. Look, I know we're all kind of playing this by ear, I said, addressing the group. But what exactly are you guys hoping to accomplish here? We don't really know, Mr. Marcells, Esther said quietly, addressing me for the first time. The Raven isn't like some oracle that explains everything in detail. Most of what we understand we have pieced together from odds and ends given to us as we awakened to our past existences. It's all just a puzzle. A puzzle that, no matter how many pieces you fit together, never gets finished. It just gets bigger, I said as I slipped my hat on and began walking up the stairs. There was no need to trade email addresses and phone numbers. They would find me wherever I might be, just like a perfect little paranoid delusion. I can remember a conversation I had with my sister before her husband died. She drifted off into the glow of the ghost light, never to return. It was in the morning, and she was standing by the kitchen bar at her house with a cup of coffee, smiling at me with the bright blue eyes we both shared. You know, except for the leather coat, you dress like someone who's here to repair the dishwasher. Why don't you get some style, Clay? Because I have to blend, sis. It's all part of the job. Someone asks for a description of my appearance, and they get a detailed sketch of 50 people seen that day. Oh, I see. It's camouflage then. No piercings, no tattoos, no outrageous hairstyle. Just that guy dressed like a repairman. Did you ever think that maybe you're too normal? What do you mean? I asked as I poured myself a cup from her high-end coffee maker and took a slice of toast from a plate by the sink. Nowadays, everyone has a style, Clay. Hell, 40-year-old dishwasher repairmen have mohawks and tribal tattoos on their face. You stand out because you're too plain. Wow. You may have a point, I said as I eyed myself in the wall mirror by the doorway. You don't have a style because you lack self-awareness, bro. You've spent most of your life floating in one computer network or another, and so you have no sense of identity. Oh, wow. This is great. I came for breakfast and I get psychoanalysis. It comes free with the toast. I had laughed and shook my head with warm bemusement. I always felt when she turned that searchlight mind of hers on me. She was like a human x-ray machine that saw through bullshit and laid out everything beneath the surface. I was lost without that mind to guide me. I felt as if I was the one who was a ghost, wandering through a world of image and dream. She had needed someone better than me to help guide her through her nightmare. In the end, she had become more and more like me, diving into a synthetic world that never really existed. Why couldn't I be more like her now? Why couldn't I just see through the ghost light and accept reality? I know why. Because I've never seen reality. Cyber mages are born, not made. From the first time I crawled in front of a computer screen and saw a window into that vast reflection of the human consciousness, I was hooked. There it was, a web of ideas and knowledge, sound and image, hope, fear, and desire, all joined in a collective void where the body was only a blip of light in the vastness of cyberspace. But finally now I was beginning to see that there had always been more. There was darkness and a truth that could not be described, encoded, or contained in the cage of technology. And man, being the eternal cosmic fool, had tried to replicate that truth, only to create a monstrosity called Ghostlight. The waiting list for receiving cybernetic implants is miles long, and initiates usually sign on in their early teens. I had been 15 when I was convinced by my parents to let me present my file to the American Cybernetics Board for evaluation. I had been waiting 4 years and was studying at Atlanta Tech when I got the call. I remember the long, grueling interviews and physical exams as they tested my every strength and weakness. I was found to be the perfect candidate for what was then an experimental program. Now I look back and remember how 3 different therapists had went over the side effects in detailed lectures about the possible deterioration of certain cognitive faculties. One doctor had even put his thin, aging hands on my shoulders, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "You will never have a normal life." I had smiled that arrogant grin of a young idiot and replied, "What is a normal life?" I knew the answer now. A normal life is getting up and going to work, meeting a woman you like enough to even contemplate marrying, and having kids that become the center of your universe. It is learning that other people are real and important, and I traded it all for data. So here I was, walking down a street in St. Louis suburb, looking for the home of a man who had all of those things, and had them stolen from him by people like me. Everything he had worked for and cherished, right up to a sterling reputation, ripped away by those who saw only a number on a screen in place of a human soul. And here I was, some guy dressed like a repairman, come to sift through the wreckage that was left of his life. His home had once been picturesque, but now it was a ruin. The yard overgrown and covered in refuse by the same hateful vandals who had spray-painted graffiti of words like killer and sadist all over the walls of the house. I had found that his family had moved due to the strain of living with the hatred of those around them. However, I had almost uncovered that they had left behind many of their personal belongings, and there I hoped may lay some clue. It was a clear night, but even in the suburbs the sky was barely visible through the haze of pollution that no new government legislation could lift. I crept across the front yard and, standing on the porch, plugged into the retinal scanner and replicated Kenny's wife's iris digitally with the hardware, and the door clicked open. It was all there. All the remnants of family life intact inside the darkness of the home. I had seen all of Kenny's computer files, so there was only one thing I was looking for. The one thing I hoped that they would not dare to take with them in their retreat. The family ghost light scanner. I thought of Neil Kenny's grief-stricken wife and tried to imagine what she would do with this unpleasant artifact. She could have thrown it away or destroyed it, but there would be so many good memories. It would be like a photo album filled with images too painful to view, but too precious to destroy. It would be hidden somewhere, buried in a bedroom closet or on a top shelf just out of the field of everyday vision. As it turned out, it was on the floor of a walk-in behind an automated rack of women's clothing. I noted a naughty nun adult Halloween costume and found it reassuring that even his secret fetish wasn't even a secret. I carried it into the spacious living room and studied the control panel before inserting my input cable, bypassing the simple security code. I began to feed the recorded digital images into my mind one at a time, inspecting every scene with scientific scrutiny. Ghost light scanners are not used for exactly the same purposes as a home movie camera. The events recorded in the memory of a scanner oftentimes are elementary, but also very telling of those who have used it. Neil Kenny had missed his baby son's first steps and used the scanner to see the event later. One of his pet terriers had been messing on the carpet in the living room at night, and the scanner had revealed the culprit. Kenny's oldest son had been sneaking cigarettes at the window of his bedroom, and the ghost light had shown his crime to his parents. His wife at some point had used it to catch Neil watching pornography, and he in turn had witnessed how much she drank during the day while he was at work. At some point, one or both had used it to watch themselves making love on various occasions in many different places. All of these were mundane, trivial events by comparison to the horrors that Kenny was accused of. As I reviewed the recordings one by one, I was haunted by the feeling that I was not alone. I attribute it to the paranoia induced by my implant, but still the feeling remained. Then, as I was reviewing the images, I noticed that the control panel on the scanner itself began to light up, and within seconds the room was filled with the ghastly blue-violet light of the device's projector. I was startled and sat up from the chair, wondering if somehow I had inadvertently activated the scanner. I reached for the off command button, but found I was unable to disable the steady luminescence which was filling the room. I could see the semi-transparent image of myself as I had entered the house, and watched with eerie wonder at the actions. I really do look like a repairman, I thought to myself as I watched my image walking up the stairs. It was then that I noticed the figure which stood across from me by the window, studying me serenely with his hands tucked into the pockets of his slacks. I instantly recognized him as Neil Kenny. But this was no dim reflection of the past. This Neil Kenny was aware of me and watching me with a crooked, arrogant smile. He walked towards me and stood directly in front of me, and I could see his mouth was moving, repeating a series of phrases over and over as he held his hands out pleadingly as if in explanation. At first I thought that this was a recorded message, or maybe even that Neil Kenny's spirit was reaching out from beyond the grave. Hadn't Ryan said that in the universe from where he and his friends had originated, such apparitions were commonly seen by those born with the proclivity to acknowledge them? but there was something familiar about this image's gestures and appearance that sent a chill running over my flesh. I began to watch the movements of his mouth, and reading his lips, I suddenly knew. I know now that I can be with Tom in the light, that by dying, I can exist here in the past with him. He was repeating the words my sister had carefully mouthed in her last recorded message verbatim, and even mimicking every gesture and expression she had used. My hands were shaking violently as the apparition flickered like static for a moment, and then became the very picture of her in every detail. I felt like screaming, but my chest was heavy, frozen, and paralyzed as the specter reached out, and I felt strange hands that buzzed with electrical heat touch my face. It was leaning over me. Her face only inches from mine, as it carefully mouthed the words, "I can go anywhere." My paralysis broke and I screamed, lashing out at it, but finding myself falling to the floor, and standing over me, laughing, was the image of my dead sister. Then the hum of the scanner stopped, and the nightmare indigo twilight faded as I was once more left in darkness. Chapter 10. Journal of Clayton Marcells, October 27th, 2049. I stood trembling and collected the scanner before rushing from the house, despite the terror I felt of the microwave-sized device I was carrying. I tried to think of where to go and what my actions should be, but the sound of police sirens allowed no time for me to formulate a plan. Some concerned neighbor had seen the light through the windows and called the police, and now they were coming for me. My vehicle was blocks away, but I made a run for it, hoping that I had enough of a lead to escape. I had almost made it to my car when I was intercepted by a black Credence hybrid which squealed to a halt before me. The passenger door flew open, and there was Miss Houston from the Albright complex in Mississippi, waving me into the car urgently. Hearing the police car speeding around the corner, I leapt in, slamming the door behind me. Her foot came down on the accelerator, and the car took off at an unbelievable speed down the empty street. "How the hell did you get here?" I said, as I braced with my right hand against the dash as she whirled around a corner without even tapping the brake. "We're all in trouble. The jig is up, Mr. Marcells," she said, as once more the pedal hit the floor and she flew out into a back road. "Yamashita knows what we did, and they've been waiting for you to project and locate you." "Ah, the scanner," I said, slamming my fist against the window with the rage at my ignorance. "I was hoping to find you before you did anything, and the Roses said you were coming here." "So it wasn't a concerned neighbor," I mumbled to myself more than anything. "They've had every police and security firm in America on hold waiting for you to get located. I can't believe you actually rented a car under your own name. I thought you were a professional." "I didn't know I was being hunted. It's not like we could just call you, Marcells. They would have tracked your phone as soon as you answered." "So they're after you too?" "In a big way. But Jesse was monitoring the Yamashina system and noticed when the bulletin went out. I barely got out of the complex before security got the message." Luckily, they watch a lot of goddamn Yamashita television crap, and they hadn't looked at their monitors for a couple hours. Thank God for human incompetence, I said nervously as she hit the gravel at what seemed like 70 miles per hour. We were flying through what looked like an old industrial park full of abandoned machinery and condemned factory buildings, neglected and ruined in the darkness. In the rearview camera screen, showing directly behind us, I could see the flashing lights of our pursuers. There's no way we're going to outrun them. We don't have to, she answered as she flew around a curve in a cloud of dust and then swerved back and forth on the road as she fought to maintain control. We just have to get out of their line of vision and hit a long enough stretch of road. For what? To hit 80 miles per hour and travel back in time? I said nervously, laughing. What? She said, flashing me a look of confusion. Nothing. It's just an old movie, I replied as she shook her head with irritation. We can't travel through time. Her tone was serious, as if she were simply answering a question. We can only cut through space. I stared at her in silence as the car seemed to be ready to slide off the road. Put on your seatbelt, she demanded, as she checked the camera and saw the police were no longer directly behind us. I did as she said and watched as she gripped the steering wheel and grimaced slightly as if concentrating on a particularly difficult equation. Brace yourself. This is going to be really rough. Once more, I could recall a doctor carefully explaining to me when I was 19, your grasp on reality may eventually begin to slip into psychosis. It appeared about 20 yards ahead of us in the middle of the road. A single pinpoint of purple, flickering light, no bigger than how a star would peer in the night sky. As we sped closer, it began to grow, and that was when I realized the same glow was shining inside the car, its source being Miss Houston's eyes and hands. With awe, I watched as the glow began to encapsulate the entire body of the vehicle, as the light ahead of me became a circular pool of whirling violet liquid light. In an instant, we entered it, and I was aware of everything outside the vehicle melting into the radiance until it seemed as if we were swallowed in an ocean of lavender. All sound, all perception was deadened, and then it was gone in an instant of overkill of sensation as we plunged headlong into darkness, and once more the car skidded across some solid surface. For a moment, I thought we were going to flip over entirely. But with a sudden crash, my side of the vehicle became slamming down as weeds and tall grass rushed up into the windows. At last we had come to a stop, and all was still, as I gradually forced my grip to release from the door handle. I had been holding on as if my life had depended on it. I looked over at Miss Houston and found her collapsed against the steering wheel in exhaustion. I reached over cautiously to feel for her pulse before her head shot up as she slapped my hand away. Come on. We've got to get going, she said wearily as she unsnapped her seatbelt and opened the door, leaving me alone in the car. As I crawled from the car into the cool darkness of autumn night, I was greeted by a sky filled with sparkling stars and dense woodland surrounding us. The car laid a dead husk of metal in the middle of an open clearing in the forest. My savior was tossing bundles from the open trunk onto the ground, stopping only to pin her black hair away from her face with a clip before slamming the hatch closed. Where are we? She looked at me as if this were a stupid question. Skidaway Island State Park, about 15 miles from Savannah, she answered, as she began lifting the gear from the grass over her shoulder. You're going to have to help me carry some of the stuff, you know, she said as she began to walk off towards a path through the clearing. I carefully placed the scanner on top of the car and collected a sleeping bag and backpack from the ground before retrieving Kenny's device and jogging to catch up with her. Are we camping? I said, out of breath by the time I caught up. You don't like camping? I love camping, but I just didn't think that was on the agenda. We have to stay as far away from everything as we can and lay low for a while. The Roses will contact us when it's safe. We've got a campsite reserved under false names. I'm Rachel, you're Ross. We're married, and this is our honeymoon. I laughed slightly, and she once more eyed me like I was a moron. What's so funny? Rachel and Ross, like that old TV show, Friends. Jesus. Jesse knows I hate stupid jokes like that. What's our last name, by the way? Chandler? I laughed again and she rolled her eyes. Another joke, right? No. It's the same joke, really. It felt good to laugh for a moment, but in the whirl of everything that had happened, I was instantly struck with the realization of what just had occurred. I stopped walking and stared at her in silence. She turned and stomped her foot with impatience. What? How the hell did you do that? She rubbed her eyes with weariness and looked up. For a moment, I saw just how tired she was and close to collapse. We'll have to talk about that later. Let's just get a campsite, all right? With no alternative, I nodded and followed as we walked onward until we came to a parking lot and ranger station. We introduced ourselves under our aliases and explained that we were backpacking through the park as part of our romantic weekend together. The old couple manning the booth asked no questions and only wondered if we had seen any storm clouds on the way, since they had heard thunder and thought they might have seen a flash of lightning within the past hour. The hike down the road to the campground seemed endless, and Miss Houston said nothing until we had reached the small reserved area and placed our 2 tent packets in position. I hit the erect switch, and in moments, a small 1-person dome tent had folded out from the suitcase-sized bundle. I looked at her questioningly, but she only said, "In the morning, okay? I'm exhausted." I shrugged my resignation and crawled inside my tent, only then realizing that I too felt as if I could sleep for decades. However, the events of the evening would not allow me the peace required to sleep. I folded my hands across my chest and began the deep breathing exercises I had learned all those years ago in preliminary therapy before my surgery. I calmed myself, repressing the memory of my encounter in the ghost light, and attempted to meditate. Within a few minutes, it suddenly occurred to me from the depth of my trance that even if this was a psychotic episode, it was autumn in the deep woods, and I was camping with a beautiful woman. Chapter 11, The Distortion Diaries, July 20th, 2034. There has been an unfortunate development in my relationship with Janique. Unfortunately, it seems that I have murdered her a bit prematurely. Despite my best efforts to keep her away from the house, let alone my private studio, the ridiculous woman insisted on spending the night after our last rendezvous. I had been drinking and had taken a number of pills in order to indulge Janique in a series of sex acts which I was not particularly in the mood for. I fell unconscious at some time near 3 in the morning, and when I awoke an hour or so later, the moron was gone. How she managed to open the hidden sliding panel which opens to the stairway into my studio is beyond me. She actually almost knocked me over as she came running back up the stairs after exploring my workshop and gallery. She screamed in horror when she saw me and demanded that I stay away and not touch her. At last, all illusions had been shattered. It was such a damn relief to pummel the woman senseless after all this time, and then drag her by her hair, mumbling through her bloodied lips for help, to my workshop. It was a truly transcendent experience to strap her onto the table and begin the systematic detachment of each and every joint in her body. She screamed and cried, and I laughed and giggled with delight as if I were a child again. Oh, how I had longed to do this. So enwrapped was I in my delirious ecstasy that I almost forgot to close the chamber door. It wouldn't be good if someone somehow heard poor Jonique's cries for mercy. When I had finished breaking her, I had to inject her with a massive dose of amphetamines to keep her lucid for the rest of the surgery. When I looked down at her bruised, naked body, I saw a vision of eyes. I saw eyes blinking and staring from her flesh like open, gleaming boils. Such inspiration comes rarely, and I dearly treasure those moments when it arrives. After I had finished, I watched in breathless anticipation after Jonique had passed for her apparition to appear. When it did, I gasped with wonder at the beauty which I had created. She hovered screaming at the side of her own corpse displayed by the others on the wall. I had only a moment to relish the sight of her lovely shattered bones and dozens of searching eyes before I would be forced to use the ghost light and banish her. It was after she had seemingly evaporated into the glow that I could swear I could hear a voice whispering to me in the room. I strained to listen closer, but I could not discern the words that were being spoken by the unseen presence. After some time, it grew fainter. However, before its departure, I had come to the bizarre conclusion that the sound's origin was from within the projecting globe of the ghost light itself. I vowed that after I had created some fabrication and executed Jonique's disappearance, that I would spend more time within the light to investigate this mystery. For the time being, I would be busy arranging Jonique's drug-addicted flight to South America. The first order of business was calling her parents and asking if they had seen my beloved since she had canceled our date for the evening. I was still awash in the delight of the morning's work, and it took me several moments to work up the proper concern with which to pepper my voice for the conversation. I stood for a time and randomly flipped through the channels of my wall-size 3D television, trying to come down from my high. I paused on some random satellite network where two young men were discussing with great detail some ridiculous paranormal event from the recent past. But is the vortex actually closed? One man with a variety of strange necklaces and outlandish hair said. Well, of course it is, replied the other. A short, dark-haired man with a black mustache and sleepy eyes replied. I recognized him as the host of a somewhat well-known radio talk show. If it were still active, then we'd all be in Mossboro right now, I'm sure. He laughed as the studio audiences joined in on his humor. But how can we know? The intense younger man with the extremely dark tan said excitedly. Below his face, his name and occupation appeared, and I realized he was the owner and editor of some fringe World Mysteries magazine. If Albright owns the entire area, how are we to be sure, really sure, that there isn't some residual activity? Well, from that perspective, we can't be, the older man answered thoughtfully. Exactly. So who's to say that Albright isn't actually experimenting with what is left of the vortex? Why, I have sources that indicate that Albright is nothing but a subsidiary of Yamashita Enterprises, that name that we all recognize. The other man smiled wistfully and folded his arms confidently. If Yamashita is involved with the vortex, then we all have reason to worry. Precisely, the younger said with a profound revelation. I hit the mute button, and now, properly calmed, lifted my phone to start making